Alrighty, welcome to the monthly recap. This is for the month ending today, November 29th, 2024. Hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is by far and away my favorite holiday. I love everything about it. I love pumpkin pie, all-time favorite food. I love family, friends, football. I just love it all. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And I am thankful for all of you. Thank you all so much for all the support you give to me, my team, my business. It means everything to us. And yeah, for me and the sweater crew, thank you. So let's talk about November. As I mentioned every single time, it was a crazy busy month. And I know I say that a lot, but it really was. I mean, we had an election. What did the markets think of the election? We're going to be talking about that. We had a Fed meeting where the Fed cut rates by 0.25%. It was their second time they cut rates. Updated inflation data. What did the Fed have to say about that? Jobs, big corrections coming from BLS. What else is new? But there was some significant revisions from the BLS. Talk about that briefly. Mortgage rates as a whole remained around 6.875. That's actually a good thing, only because rates were worse. Rates had a little bit of a roller coaster month. They started off 6.875-ish. They increased almost all the way up to about 7.375, and then they came back down to 6.75. So, again, that's a first-time home buyer making less than 120% of the area median income, but it's an actual significant improvement from where they were. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the election results. You know me, I try to stay as about apolitical as I can. If you ever really want to know my true political leanings, corner me, get a drink in me. I will be more than happy to talk to you about it. But for these updates, I try to remain as apolitical as possible. Okay, so Trump won the election pretty resoundingly. I mean, we can say that objectively so, right? Everybody was thinking like, hey, this is going to be a really close election, and it simply wasn't. I mean, this thing was pretty much over by like 9 o'clock. So Trump wins, the markets react. As the markets have done each of the last three elections, okay, the markets immediately worsen. They have a really bad day immediately, and then they calm down, they find a new normal, and they start to improve. So what we've noticed is, pretty significant sell-off the first day, and then second day, markets start to bounce back, and that's what we saw this time again. Trump presidency was initially seen, and is still somewhat seen as inflationary. Again, staying apolitical, being somewhat objective. Trump has already come out and said, hey, day one, he wants to implement new tariffs. Like, that's inflationary in nature. There's no way around it. That would cause the cost of goods to increase, okay? The markets initially saw that and said, oh no, markets worsened, rates jumped the day of his election results coming through. And then the second day, they're like, well, there's a big difference between what you want and what you get. And the two don't always line up with one another. We're still waiting on a wall to be built on the southern border. And that was one of the entire platforms that he ran on the first time around. So, how much of what he wants to happen is actually going to happen? Rates worsened, then they started to improve. One thing that the markets are really grateful for this week is the Treasury Secretary nomination of Scott Bessent. Okay, that was seen as a very positive move for the markets. He went to Yale. He taught at Yale. He's a smart guy. He's a hedge fund manager for over 33 years. So he has a lot of real-time, real-world experience in the markets. And he was seen as a common presence. He's donated to liberal candidates in the past. He's donated to conservative. He was seen as a very middle-of-the-road choice, which was good. The markets especially needed a common presence involved. So that was really good to see. He did mention as part of his plan, he wants to cut the budget deficit to 3% of GDP by 2028, and he also wants to boost GDP to 3%. So, remove some restrictions, allow companies to go a little bit, harder, for lack of a better term. He also wants to cut the budget deficit. So he's got some pretty big, grand schemes. We'll see what all comes to fruition. But as a whole, the market saw this, and they were very happy with the choice. Fed meetings. So November 7th meeting wrapped up. Going to be talking about briefly about what the Fed talked about there. We got one more Fed meeting for the year, December 18th. That is a meeting that's associated with a summary of economic projections, as you'll see down here. Those are the meetings where the Fed doesn't just come out with a rate decision and have a press conference after. They actually have to show their work. They have to put pen to paper and say, hey, where do all the Fed members think rates are going to go? Where do all the Fed members think inflation's going to go, unemployment's going to go, GDP's going to go? They have to show all of their work. So it'd be very interesting to see the results of that meeting. The Fed meeting on November 7th, that was a unanimous decision. They did decide to unanimously cut rates by 0.25%. Um, However, the Fed acknowledged a few things that are pretty important. Okay, so Fed acknowledged that shelter costs have been lagging. Okay, shelter costs have been lagging. I've been talking about that for months now. Shelter is not caught up to what we're actually seeing in the markets. So the point there is that shelter costs make up a significant part of the inflation calculations. If that was all caught up, inflation would be much closer to the Fed's target overall. They also talked about inflation is going to get worse before it gets better. And we saw that happen quite literally on Wednesday. Talk about that in a second here. Inflation is going to get worse before it gets better. Again, not a huge surprise there. I'll show you why. And then the Fed commented that a rate cut in December is not a sure thing. The market saw that and they were initially kind of unhappy. Like, what do you mean it's not a sure thing? Like you said just a few months ago, like, hey, we're expecting 1% of rate cuts. Right now we're at 0.75%. So why is it not a sure thing? They started to kind of walk those comments back a little bit more, but basically it's a coin flip. It's basically a coin flip as to whether or not we see an additional rate cut in December, really only December. Going into 2025, we'll certainly see some additional rate cuts then. Talking about briefly, and I had this slide on my presentation last month as well, but I want to remind folks, it is very common for mortgage rates to increase after the Fed begins to cut rates, okay? It has happened 7 of the last 8 times now, okay? So 7 of the last 8 times now when the Fed has begun to cut rates, it's actually caused mortgage rates to increase temporarily, and then they start to come down. So I know mortgage rates have not done what we all wanted it to do. We actually saw our lowest point in rates right before the Fed rate cut, and since then rates have increased from around 6.125 to about 6.75. So, pretty significant worsening of mortgage rates. But it's kind of par for the course. So don't stress. I know it sucks. We are currently in the spiking period. Right after the Fed cuts rates, rates spike. We are currently in the midst of that. But there's also cause to think, hey, things will improve from here. This is just kind of business as normal from the market's perspective. Okay. So let's talk about the inflation data. So inflation had a rough month. There's no way around it. Okay. Producer price index, so wholesale inflation as business feel it. The headline increased from 1.9 to 2.4%. Core rate, when you remove volatile food and energy components, hey, we don't want the markets to be at the mercy of oil prices or, avian flu outbreaks or cost of chicken or eggs or milk or any of that. So what is the actual inflation without those volatile components? That increased from 2.9 to 3.1%, okay? So PPI as a whole increased. Businesses don't have to pass that extra cost onto consumers. That's certainly one possibility. The other possibility is they simply shrink their margins and receive less money, right? Receive less profit. So consumer price index, inflation as us consumers feel it, also increased from 2.4 to 2.6. Core was actually unchanged at 3.3%. That was a little bit of a positive surprise. Everybody was thinking it was going to increase. Personal consumption expenditures, Fed's favorite measure of inflation, okay? That came out quite literally on Wednesday. Headline went from 2.1 to 2.31. Core went from 2.65 to 2.8%. Now, you would see all this heating up inflation being like, oh no, the mortgage rates are not going to love that. If I know one thing, and Aaron's told me 100 times, inflation is the arch nemesis of bonds and mortgage rates. That's true. However, the Fed did a good job of getting ahead of it. After the November 7th meeting, they said, look, inflation is going to get worse before it gets better. And it's going to get worse before it gets better because, and almost only because, the numbers we're replacing from a year ago were much cooler. And here's an example of what I'm talking about, okay? So these are the core readings for PCE, and these are the shelter costs as well. So the core readings, let's look at that real fast. Let's focus on that. So in October 2023, that figure was only 0.133. Well, great. I mean, if inflation comes in at 0.2%, 0.2%, we're replacing 0.133, it would cause inflation to increase. Some very cool numbers here. November, 0.091. December, 0.182. We're not going to start to really make some meaningful progress again on inflation until we get into 2025, okay? Then we're going to start to replace some of these warmer figures. 0.49 is a very warm figure. 0.339, pretty warm figure. So inflation is going to get worse, but then it's going to get better. And it's only because whenever you come out with a year-over-year number, yes, the numbers today matter, but we're replacing numbers from a year ago, and those equally matter, okay? So don't stress too much about heating up inflation. If any of your friends say, hey, inflation is increasing, yeah, but we all knew it was going to happen, okay? The Fed told everybody, and it's going to get better, okay? So don't stress too much about it. Yes, a headline doesn't look great, inflation's warming up, but all in all, the markets took it with a grain of salt, and if they are, we should be as well. So let's talk about jobs. I've talked about it a fair amount this year, kind of an embarrassing amount this year, about how bad the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, has been. Okay, they continue to miss the boat time and time and time again. So brief history. So we saw unemployment increase in August from 4.1 to 4.3%. That spooked the markets. Markets started going a little crazy. Everybody's all for, hey, we need to start cutting rates because businesses are in trouble, and if businesses are in trouble, everything's in trouble. Then it decreased from 4.3 to 4.2% in September, and the markets were like, oh, that's great news. And then it's basically been at 4.1%. I'm using air quotes, 4.1% for the last couple months. Now, I'm using air quotes here because it's all because of rounding. So this actually decreased from 4.2 to 4.051. They rounded up to 4.1, but we're only a couple decimal points away from rounding down to 4% even. And then it increased from 4.051 to 4.145, but that was also rounded down to 4.1%. So we've seen a significant worsening here, but it's not really reflected in the headlines you read. Oh yeah, unemployment stayed at 4.1%. It's just because of rounding. That's how easy it is to kind of skew numbers. Worth noting, there was only 12,000 job gains in October. Like, that's terrible. That's really, really rough. It was weaker than a very low bar that was already set at 113,000. Now, here's where BLS really messed up. Okay, what else is new? So BLS initially reported 2.5 million job gains between quarter 2 of 2023 and quarter 2 of 2024. Okay, so 2.5 million jobs. That is all based on a lot of modeling. Okay, they figure out what they call the birth-death ratio, which is how many businesses were born versus how many businesses were died off. They take a very small sample size and they try to extrapolate it across the entire country. Like, the margin of error with the BLS jobs report that we get every single month, we're going to get it again next week, is wild. It's really, really, really bad. Really, really high margin of error. Well, they also come out with a quarterly census of employment and wages, QCEW. Okay. Now, that is actually real numbers. 95% of all the actual employees are factored into that. It showed only 1.246 million job gains. BLS is missing estimates by over 100,000 a month. 100,000 a month. Wow, it's basically 50%. 50% of their guesses are wrong. They are just missing the boat. What? Yeah, they are just missing the boat time and time and time again. They've had a really rough go of it. One thing I wanted to point out real fast is something that's really positive for housing market. Okay, so the median age, two different things. Median age of a first-time home buyer is 38 years old. Okay, that's worth mentioning because just within like a year ago it was like 33. So rates having risen, making housing a little bit less affordable, has really caused that age to increase. But this is actually very positive for the housing market. Okay, so when we look at the amount of births in the U.S. between 1986 essentially and 1990, we see a significant population increase. So if the median age of a first-time homebuyer is 38, we're going to be seeing a lot of first-time homebuyers coming to the market here over the next 4 to 5 years. That's going to continue to put some pressure on the housing market. We're going to have more and more first-time homebuyers wanting to enter the market. And again, builders have not been keeping up with the pace of household creation. Obviously, there's not a lot of inventory out there right now as well. So if we get just a little bit of relief on the interest rate front, we should see a flood of buyers start to enter the market. Not only do we have 2.5 years now of pent-up demand, but we also have a whole bunch of first-time home buyers that want to make a move that can't make a move yet. So it's going to be really interesting to see how real estate does over the next few years. If we just get a little bit of interest rate improvement, we should start to see a number of buyers start to enter the market. So let's look ahead real fast to December. So we got, again, jobs reports quite literally next week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend this weekend, by the way. We got updated inflation data. The Fed meeting on 12/18. Again, with the Fed kind of hemming and hawing a little bit about whether they do cut rates or not, I'd say there's like a 50-50 chance of there being a 0.25% rate cut. It really is kind of a coin flip at this point. We shall see. And then the ever important holiday earnings season. That's going to be really interesting. We hear a lot of kind of anecdotal stories about, kind of cooling of the labor market. We have, almost all-time high expenses or consumer debt with regards to homeowners, almost all-time low with regards to savings rate for U.S. consumers as well. Like, how much more pressure can homeowners take, or really the U.S. population as a whole take? It's going to be very interesting to see how that translates to holiday earnings season. So that is it. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Again, I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. For me, and I guess I'm down to one puppy, Sadie Squirrel. I don't know where Finn went. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend. If you need anything at all, let me know. Okay, appreciate you. Thank you so much. Bye.